Hey there, it's Teresa here this Wednesday with another of our conversations here around this idea that I have that really has been given to me about how we really need a new creation story to create new financial stories in our own lives and in the world. So, if you're catching the replay of this, just know that I'm delighted that you are here and honored that you took the time to watch. If you're just hopping on live right now, would love to have you just, first of all, after last week's fiasco, just say something so I know you're actually hearing me this time. Hi, good morning, Carol. Glad you're here. Can you hear me? Please type yes if you can. Got a new setup. I triple checked my microphone this week to make sure it's working. I see Sharon's come on. Good morning. Good morning. Are you hearing me? Yes. Thumbs up, love, something like that. Yay. Good morning, Wendy. Glad you could come back for this conversation. So today, I'm really going to shoot from, I'm going to be my extroverted self a little bit here today. And I have a dear friend who's even more extroverted than me. And she says, sometimes I have to hear myself talk to know what I'm thinking. I'm going to do a little bit of that here, but I have an idea of part of this idea that I want to share with you, because today I want to talk with you about stories. So bear with me. Once upon a time, we've all heard stories that begin like that, yes? And we pretty much know how those stories are going to end. Once upon a time, there's going to be all this stuff that happens in between. And then usually they end with, and they lived happily ever after. Like happy stories begin once upon a time. Now, if you hear a story that begins, it was a dark and stormy night, you already know where that story's going, don't you? And it's probably not going to end with, and they lived happily ever after. Okay? I give you this experience because human beings, we are story making machines. Like we make up stories and tell stories all the time. And we do that because it's how we try and explain things. It's how we have things mean something. And that's what human beings are really good about. We want to have something mean something. Good morning, Janelle. Glad you could join us. So, we create stories all the time. You and I create stories every day. But then there are stories that are cultural stories, that are stories that we've heard again and again and again. They're kind of like what I call the backdrop stories, that are hidden in the background, kind of like music in the background that you stop paying attention to it because it's just there. And I would dare submit that the creation stories, if you grew up in a Christian household, a Judeo-Christian tradition, even if you're not practicing that now, then the creation story, or stories actually, is in the background. And it's probably influencing you and your relationship with money and your financial results in ways you may not even be aware of, because you're not aware of the story that's playing in the background. Are you with me? I'm going to check in and see if, yep, good morning. Hey, Wendy, glad you could join us. Give me some comments or show me some love if you're following me so far. So it is with the creation stories. Now, in ancient times, I had the privilege of hearing a presentation that Rob Bell did about the creation stories. It was awesome. It was amazing. I'm not going to pretend to be able to tell you all about it like he can, but there's some pieces that stuck with me that I want to share with you because you probably haven't heard them. Back in ancient times, we're talking 2nd, 3rd century, even before that, not cross that, before way back, ancient times, people created stories to explain why they were here, to explain how they came to be here, to explain what life is about, how creation happened. And there were tons of creation stories, different kinds of creation stories way back in ancient times that different people believed in. And one of the most common popular stories, you could say, back in ancient times was the Babylonian creation story that the people of Babylon believed. And it's a story, has a fancy name. It's called the Enuma Elish, okay? I just remembered that name from the lecture that I had. And then I looked it up a little bit too to learn a little bit more. And the Enuma Elish is a creation story. And if you're familiar with the Genesis 1 creation story, you're going to immediately hear a connection here. Because the Enuma Elish story of creation, this is the one that the Babylonian people believed in. And I just want to get my notes so I can say the names right. They believed that creation, the world as we know it, the universe, was the result of a battle between two gods. See, everything in ancient time was the result of the gods. The gods, you know, that's the belief. The gods did it. The gods caused this. The gods are this. And in this particular story, it was the god Marduk and Tiamat. And they went to battle, war, and Marduk won. And what Marduk did after he killed Tiamat, I should probably say this, we should have put a little scene, like this could be a little gory here. But the story, the creation story the Babylonians believed in was that Marduk split Tiamat's body in half, this god's body in half, and he put one half up in the heavens to form the sky, and the other half to form the earth. So the Babylonians of ancient times, if anybody said, well, how did creation happen, or how did we happen to be on earth? They would say, well, it's because the gods battled, fought, won, and then they created this. That creation story, as you can see, and I didn't give you the graphic version of it, is really rooted in things like violence and destruction and power. Can you hear that? That was the narrative of that story. And in that story, understand how the gods to the Babylonians were to be feared. Pretty scary gods. Now, the Hebrew people, when he's going, ow, yeah, exactly. The Hebrew people, the Jewish people, who happened to be at the time that they decided to compile and edit and record their oral story of how creation came about. They decided to write it down, and the book of Genesis was formed. It happened while the Jewish people were exiled from Jerusalem, living in Babylon. So here they are in this culture where there's this story of this like the whole narrative of life and the world and creation is violence and domination and scary gods out there who go to battle and war and kill each other. And they create out of like death. And the Jewish people, it's like, we have a different creation story. And we need to make sure that it's remembered by our people. So let us compile it and put it in the book of Genesis. And you can hear that the first chapter 1 of Genesis is like a poem. There's a lot of similarity. It's like it says, and God created the heavens and the earth. So you can hear the similar themes of creation. But this, the narrative of the Genesis 1 creation story, is all about goodness. It's all about love. It's all about beauty. Nothing is created out of violence. It's created out of this mysterious God that is both plural and, you'll see, in some future live stream. And yet one, it's like this God creates this. All of it is good. It comes from goodness for goodness. It's declared good. And this God doesn't just create it and then, like, you know, the people of Babylon, they were dependent on the gods in the sense that if the gods, ooh, my live stream is going out of whack here. Are you guys tracking me some? Okay, I'm stopped. Maybe we're back in sync. Are you guys noticing that my live stream is out of sync? If so, give me a comment. I don't know what to do about it, but we're just gonna roll. So a very different image of a God, and a God who doesn't just, you know, create out of violence, and then you have to what's the word? You always have to, like, atone to the gods and fear the gods, because otherwise they may not keep providing for you. In the Genesis 1 story, I'm good now. Thanks, Wendy. In the Genesis 1 story, you have a God who not only creates what is good, but the things he can create too. So there's this creativity, generativity, ongoing supply provided by the Jewish God in their creation story. Very different than the Babylonian violent power, have to atone for the gods, fear the gods, etc. Which story do you want to have shape or frame your life? Yeah, I'm picking the Genesis 1, where it's about good, where the universe isn't a scary place, but it's a loving, beautiful, generative, creative, good place. 2 stories about creation. Very different narrative, very different plot line, going to impact your relationship with the universe, my relationship with the universe, the ancient people's understanding and relationship with the universe very differently. One will be fear, and one will be love and open and goodness. Can you hear that? So I told you last week, I think it was last week, that there are 2 creation stories in the Bible. There's Genesis 1's creation story that finishes just at the beginning of chapter 2. And then right after that, in chapter 2 begins a whole different creation story. It's the second creation story where you hear about Adam and Eve. And all through chapter 2, while it's a different creation story, you get the sense that this is still the same type of God and universe, loving and kind. He provides good for them, and he gives them all in this garden, and he's one with them. He's one with them. He's walking in the garden. And then comes chapter 3 in Genesis, and we hear about Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree, being banished from the garden. Now, in the early Christian tradition, for the first few centuries, there was the second creation story was meaningful in explaining human development, explaining human weakness, explaining what you might want to call human sinfulness. But the story that was still emphasized, that shaped the Christian narrative, was still that it was all good, that the world was good, that God was good. That was still there. And then right around the 2nd and 3rd century, and there were reasons for this historically, the chapter 3 part of the story started to be emphasized. And this is what I have found is like the music playing in the background. It's been playing in the background of my life. It's playing in the background of the women and men that I work with who grew up in a traditional Christian religion, may or may not be practicing it now, may not be practicing it because of this very story, like the sin part and emphasizing the sin. and that if you do the wrong thing, you're going to be punished, you're going to be banished from the garden. In the chapter 3 part of the creation story in Genesis, God is again somehow separated from you. It's like God is out there, and what starts to come in again is some of the Babylonian story of, oh, we have to fear this God, we have to atone for this God is separate from us. And it's scary if we do something wrong. Now, as adults, maybe you know this isn't true, but when do most of us start to first hear these creation stories, especially if we grew up in a traditional type of religion with some religion of origin, Catholic, Lutheran, Evangelical, Methodist? We hear these stories when we're children. And children take stories literally. I know that. And I'm sure you do too. So here's the thing. We started out with this good impulse. And in Babylon, there was this creation story that was about violence and scary, and the gods were scary, and life was scary. And here come the Jewish people with a faith tradition of no, 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 no. This universe is good. This God is good. This God provides for us and is one with us. And then later in the history of the church, of the Christian religion, it's like, oh, oops, but we're sinners. But we're sinners. And if we sin, then we have to struggle and toil. And boy, one way I see my people struggling and toiling is around money. If you have debt, or if you're just making ends meet, that's struggle and toil. If you have money, but you somehow think that's bad or wrong, you'll feel guilty about it. But also that the God, again, is somehow separate, and we have to be good and live good lives. And, one day we'll get to be with God in heaven. The stories that are playing in the background of our minds are going to impact how we show up and respond in the world. If we've been enculturated without even realizing it with some type of story about a God who punishes, or who is out there in heaven someplace, or who is separate from us, if we grow up with a story as Christians do, that then later eventually Jesus came to save us from our sins, but the emphasis, then the story we still have about ourselves is going to be, we're sinners, something's wrong with us, I'm not worthy, I'm not good, I have to do these things to be good. And all of those stories have us engage in the world, whether we're aware of it or not, from a place of fear. And if nothing else, they have us engage with our money from a place of fear, because we can't trust a God, really, to provide for us if we've got a narrative about that God that says we do one thing wrong and we're banished and we have to toil and struggle and we have to make it happen. Now, that's not really the God of the Old Testament, but that's what I find sticks with people, subconsciously or consciously. It has some of my people say, I can't buy into religion anymore because I just don't buy that, which is cool. That's really healthy. But they don't know that there's an older, healthier religion. Even the Christian tradition, where we believe that Jesus was God come and incarnate in the world. An older Christian tradition says that the first incarnation of God is in creation, is in this universe. I have a client, I don't think she's on this morning, but she just had a powerful insight. She said, the word scared and the word sacred, same letters moved around. My question, I guess I'm going to leave you with today, and then I want to see your comments or your questions yourself, see how this is resonating with you. So you can start typing if you want to, because I know there's a delay. Is that my invitation for you is to start to pay attention to the stories you're listening to or telling yourself about God, about the universe, about yourself, about money. And notice if they're ones that are scary, if they produce fear. Notice if your first response is fear. Because if it is, then in some way, shape, or form, the story that has shaped you most, the plot line, is not one that begins once upon a time and they live happily ever after. So pay attention to your emotions, because I'll tell you, pay attention to what stories not only you're telling yourself and you're listening to, because the stories we tell ourselves are going to be shaped by these deeper cultural stories. Just notice them. Notice when your response is fear, that somehow you have to protect, you have to hold on, you have to defend, you have to fight. There's that violence. You have to grab power. And what just this week, well, actually 2 weeks, because I can't be here next Wednesday, just for the next couple of weeks, just begin to imagine, what if there is nothing to fear? What if everything in this universe is good, is good, is good? I'm good. Whatever is happening in my life right now, like God is at work bringing good to it. What if there's nothing to be afraid, because, and here's what abundance is, gang, here's the definition of abundance. Abundance is, what if abundance, let me finish a thought. Abundance and grace and blessing and love and generativity and creativity and all of that and supply is what this universe is really about. And that the God who created this universe is not some separate God out there that if we do things right, we one day get to be within, but that God is right here with us and in us, still creating, still wanting to create good, still wanting to create good, still wanting to create good for you, for me, for the world. The creation hasn't stopped. It's ongoing. That's part of the Genesis 1 creation story. It's ongoing. So notice when fear or struggle or toil comes in. Notice the stories you tell yourself. Notice when you respond with fear. And just imagine, what if the real story was, it's not scary, the universe, but it's benevolent and kind? What if instead of being scary, scared, it's sacred and holy? What if instead of being, a separate, it's one? What if instead of a violent universe, it's really a loving universe and you are safe? How might that change how you behave and treat yourself and others, how you respond in your life? How might that change how you respond and react and relate with money? Maybe you wouldn't have to be so afraid. Maybe you wouldn't have to struggle so hard to atone or to be good. I just invite you to start to think about it, because here's where I was going. What I've come to understand is abundance is not about, how much money we have or how much possessions we have. It's not a quantity-based thing. It's not even something outside of us. Abundance is knowing, not just in our head, but knowing that we are part of something bigger and greater and more loving and wonderful than we are. And that we have access to all that we need. That's the Genesis 1 creation stories message. That's the chapter 2's message. So if you've been heavy on the, oh, there's my feed going slow again. So if you've been like really indoctrinated with the Genesis chapter 3 part of the creation story and the fall and the sin and the banished from the garden and the struggle and toil, then I would invite you to go back and, as Janelle said, reread those first 2 chapters and just try and steep yourself in. You were good from the beginning. Everything was good from the beginning. Once upon a time is meant to end always with happily ever after. What happens in between is really up to us and the story we listen to and the belief we have about God, the universe, and ourselves. So there, my extrovert talking out loud to pull some threads together. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. I always pour my tea and I never get to drink it during this live stream. Oh, we're having technical difficulties again. I hope it comes through better than it's looking right now. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to try a different platform for these live streams. Maybe we won't have as many technical difficulties. So I'm going to take a sip of tea. I do want to say I'm going to be out of town and I'm actually speaking at an event next Wednesday. So I will not be able to do this conversation next week, but I'll look forward to picking them back up again in 2 weeks. So May 22nd at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, I'm just going to sit here for a moment and see if you have any comments or questions. Just give me a yes, this stirred something. Wow, I got something. Carol's saying I'm just a little fuzzy. Yeah. I think it's catching up, almost catching up. So any comments, final comments? Thank you again for being here. Please add your comments afterwards. Janelle, yes, please do read those chapters again. And remember, in our heads, we may know this. But that doesn't mean these stories aren't playing in the background, influencing us, because they shaped us at a young age. That's it for today. Thanks again for being here. And I will look forward to having another conversation with you about who knows what 2 weeks from today. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.